Good afternoon. I'm Molly Schnook, Project Manager with the Center for Community Planning and Development at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's program, the Economic Inclusion Roundtable, Moving Cleveland Above the Trend, Benchmarking Regional Performance. Our program today is part of Levin's Economic Inclusion Roundtable series, which is part of a 2-year effort funded by the George Gund Foundation aimed at monitoring regional economic performance to advance inclusive growth throughout Northeast Ohio. I'd also like to mention that this series was undertaken with additional support of the U.S. Economic Development Administration and is sponsored by the Levin College Dean's Diversity Council. In this program today, we're going to talk about the release of a new study examining mid-sized regional economies. To share the findings of today's report, we have Dr. Irena Lendl, Research Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Economic Development here at the Levin College of Urban Affairs. Also joining us today is Dr. Karen Chappell, Professor and Chair of City and Regional Planning at the University of California at Berkeley. And we also have Dr. Roland Englund, Dean and Professor, also of the Maxine Levin College of Urban Affairs. Dr. Lendl, you're going to give us a overview today here of this dashboard study, what factors were considered, the methodology we used, and what we've learned so far.
Thank you, Molly. I will present the synopsis of our report, which is heavily data-driven. We studied the mid-sized metropolitan area comparable to Cleveland. And this is sort of resembles the study we've done before on what is known as economic dashboard for Northeast Ohio. However, this time we went a little bit further and we looked not only at the comparable metro area statistics, but we also look at their programmatic activities and public policy. Let me please share my screen with a couple of slides and let me tell you briefly about the study. Can you see that screen? So what we did, we looked at the mid-sized metropolitan economies that are comparable to Cleveland and other MSAs in Northeast Ohio. We look at the various structural and policy-based factors and 43 variables that are associated with regional growth and includes the wide range of indicators, starting with educational attainments, business composition, economic composition of the region, encompassing different regional assets and quality of life with metro areas. We also studied the indicators of poverty, social support, population, and many others. So we looked at the sample of 135 metropolitan areas that are ranging in population from about 350,000 to almost 4 million. And this excluded the mega MSAs like New York and Chicago that are not really comparable to Cleveland, and also eliminated the long tail of very small MSAs that are not comparable even to small MSAs within Northeast Ohio. As a result of the various statistical analyses, we received, as a result of this research, the 5 factors that seems to be driving differentiation between metropolitan areas in the sample of 135. And also, we regressed these factors towards the output indicators of regional growth, and we found a statistically significant association between these 5 factors and the change in employment, change in gross regional product, and change in per capita income in these metropolitan areas. So what are these 5 factors of growth? The first and the most influential factor is what we call innovation and talent. This factor includes number of variables. It's a STEM occupations, bachelor's degrees, number of high-tech jobs, patents, brain gains, number of STTR, SPR awards, and it also correlated with high-growth firms, international talent, venture capital, industry R&D, internet access, co-working spaces, and some others. So this factor alone explains about 25% of variation across this sample of 135. And Cleveland is not scoring very high in this factor. And while we have the talent in high-tech industries and same occupations, but we are not doing so well in brain gain, and we are not gaining enough tech talent. We need to attract and keep more to be on par with those metro areas that we identify as achievable. So we look at the two groups of metro areas within each factor, and we call these two groups achievable and aspirational. While the achievable metro areas differ from Cleveland, and some of them are not really comparable because they might have a really different asset or, for example, being a state capital like Columbus, when we discretely look at the variables of this indicator, we try to learn how they achieve better results in these variables consecutively to do better as a region in their mega economic indicators like gaining employment or increasing output. So the achievable metro areas seems to have some policies and programmatic activities that are within the reach for Cleveland within the shorter time period. We also look at the metro areas that we call aspirational, and those metro areas seems to have slightly significant asset that these programmatic activities are built on. And although they are not outside of the reach of Cleveland, but probably within the more strategic timeline, a longer time period. For example, for the factor of innovation and talent, among achievable were Columbus and Cincinnati from our state, Indianapolis and Kansas City and Pittsburgh. From those that we can aspire to are Minneapolis and Charlotte. And when we look across of all these programmatic activities in achievable and aspirational metro areas, it seems that the drivers for success would be having a very strong research university, having a good connection between the university and local tech companies, building the path for graduates to achieve technical skills and then to be placed to work within these companies before they graduate. It's a strong partnership between these educational institutions and various local coding boot camps programs that curve the tech talent within the area. It's the programs that train, educate, and connect specifically minorities and other towards a disadvantaged population to high-paying tech jobs. It's also a sound strategy to attract large and not necessarily tech companies. These are non-tech companies, but these companies also building and have their technology teams, and these teams sometimes sizable that are accounting for thousands of tech jobs, providing work for tech graduates in these areas. Another very influential factor was entrepreneurship in high-cost areas. So why we like entrepreneurship is understood, but why in high-cost areas? What we see that the metro areas that scored high on this indicator were located primarily in the East and West Coast. This indicator includes variables such foreign-born employment, small firms, cost of doing business, housing affordability, self-employment. So what we see through these indicators, there is a strong correlation between entrepreneurs that are either self-employed or work in small firms, but also the housing affordability and the high cost of living. So we look where these metro areas are, and sure enough, they are in a very high coastal, cost of living coastal places. So this factor explains about 60% of variation in regional performance. And again, Cleveland has very affordable level of living, and we are not nearly have as many self-employed and people employed in small firms like some overperformers in this indicator. So Cleveland ranks 96 in this indicator. And we want to be as achievable as Minneapolis, and maybe we can aspire to Eugene, Oregon, and Colorado Springs, Colorado. And again, when we look at this achievable and aspirational metro areas, it's not necessarily that it's a very fair comparison sometimes. Some metro areas are smaller, some metro areas have assets that we don't have, but it does not prevent us from looking why they're doing better and what we can learn from them. So what we learned from this achievable and aspirational overperformers, that their success is driven by really growth in startups. And many of those startups are women-owned businesses. These areas creating coalitions of entrepreneurs, investors, support organizations to connect each other and to provide resources for thriving entrepreneurship. They have, for example, a comprehensive plan to bolster local entrepreneurship and startup growth. They encouraging students to start their business while they're in universities. They are creating events, organizations, co-working spaces, accelerator programs. A very good example is Minneapolis Cup, which is the largest statewide competition for startups in the country, supporting 10,000 entrepreneurship just for this event. So another important factor we call new residential centers. And while innovation and entrepreneurship were two top factors in our past studies conducted over the last 10 years, this is a new factor that popped up in the third place and wasn't there before. So what are new residential centers? What we found that geographically, these are smaller places with a rapid growth of population, rapid new construction, a booming employment in young companies. They also have high health insurance coverage. So besides having variables positively related to this factor, they have also variables negatively related, like legacy of place and city poverty ratio, also percentage of manufacturing in the economy, which means they score low on these variables. They have not many buildings constructed in the 1940s. They have a low ratio of city poverty. They have a low percentage of manufacturing. So this factor is also pretty influential. It's explaining about 11% of variation. And we found a lot of these metropolitan areas in Texas, for example. So we found that these metro areas also have overall general population growth, and they have increased in their share of millennial population. So unfortunately, Cleveland is losing population, and in our comparable sample, we have one of the lowest portions of millennials. And as we know, millennials became a prevailing cohort of population in the US economy. They became the main customers in our economy. So within the achievable aspirational, we again see Minneapolis, Columbus, Cincinnati. We also see Charlotte, Colorado Springs, and Kansas City. So it seems that the areas that fare well in innovation entrepreneurship also growing construction and becoming residential centers where they grow general population. It seems to be that the drivers of success in these residential centers are also universities and the associated booming tech hubs that are building in the cities and across metropolitan areas. What also is interesting that many of these places have a particular public policy towards affordable living. Because of this, new residential centers are not associated with high per capita income change in these metro areas. It seems that the average wages are not very high in these areas. So these places needed more affordable housing, and they were constrained in availability of affordable housing. So the couple of examples could be where Minneapolis changed its zoning towards having more affordable housing, or Charlotte that raised $100 million just for affordable housing projects alone. So another factor that is new in this dashboard study is what we call retirement destination. This factor includes variables such as high percentage of senior population, housing vacancy factor, recreational facilities, and it scored low in share of millennials and labor force participation rate. And also, when we look where the metro areas that score high in this factor are located, we found a lot of Florida places. This is the destination for retirees. It explains right now about 80% of variation in the regional sample that we selected comparable to Cleveland. According to last census, right now, we have a cohort of about 73 million of baby boomers that will be looking for an attractive retirement destination by 2030. And they will spend there their retirement income. We know we can compare with Florida in weather and beaches and ocean. However, we have a very important asset that we can offer for retirees. We have a world-renowned healthcare institution like Cleveland Clinic. We have a world-class art and culture scene. And we have such a typical Midwest sense of community and social work that is valued by older people. So Pittsburgh scored really interestingly high in retaining their own retirees. So we don't necessarily want to be only known as a place for destination of retirees, but if we can just retain our own. And what we learned from various places that have high percentage of retired population, for example, Eugene, Oregon, the people there are attracted to all this wonderful mix of their population and their art and culture and recreation amenities that, for example, College Town offered. They have an abundant arts and culture, they have different outdoor activities, and they have a healthy mix between the millennials and the boomers population. And it tends to be attractive for prospective retirees. So marrying that with the lower cost of living that Cleveland offers and the quality of healthcare, recreational arts and culture activities, our sense of community, I think we can at least try to capture our own retired people. The last but very important factor that explains about 5% of variation is polarization. And when the previous four factors were all positively correlated with the factors of economic well-being of the regions, this factor was consistently, statistically significantly negatively correlated with regional growth. This factor reflects variables such as poverty, income inequality, social disadvantage, and additional government income support. It also correlates highly with female-owned businesses and minority businesses. It scores high in rural unemployment. So Cleveland is again ranked 97th worth out of 135 MSAs in this factor. We are not doing well in polarization. And what we learned very particular about this, it was really hard to come up with aspirational and achievable metro areas because it highly correlated across all sample with the places with high minority and population in the area. So it tells us about the systemic change on polarization that is necessary across the board. So one example that we featured was just interesting policy strategy that offer many job opportunities for people who really didn't have special education or careers. Often in Utah, smaller metro areas, they choose targeted industrial strategy after transcontinental railroad lines eliminated stop in their city and basically many jobs associated with the railroad went away. They targeted the aerospace, outdoor recreation, and events manufacturing as their industries. And they were very precise in their target because they saw that this industry are relatively easy to enter for people who don't have extensive educational training, maybe caught at the beginning of their careers. And that definitely helped the metro area to provide jobs for many middle class people compared to any other large metro areas. And that did result in less income inequality. However, if we look precisely at other factors for polarization, we found that this metro area is predominantly white. They have only 5% minority population, while Cleveland and other metro areas that score poorly on this factor have in the vicinity of 20%. So when we look at all these factors and the variables of employment change or gross regional product change or per capita income change, we can see that innovation and talent universally scored positively and was statistically significant in influencing changing these output indicators in a good manner. The new residential centers were positively correlated with employment growth and output growth, but not necessarily with per capita income growth. They were negatively related to per capita income. There are a lot of people who don't have high wages living in those rapidly growing places. The retirement destination was positively correlated only with per capita income, but it didn't offer any employment or output growth in these metro areas. And as I said before, polarization was negatively affecting regional growth on all three variables. For those of you who are interested in more results and you want to see this presentation and associated report, you can look at the links that we will see here.
Thank you, Dr. Lendl, for sharing that with us. I'd like to turn to Dr. Chappell for her reactions to the findings here. You were part of the group that helped to review the methodology of this and acted as an advisor to this project. So your familiarity with this is very helpful. But I'd also like to get your sense of regional competitiveness and growth and what that looks like in a broader context.
Sure, thank you so much. And it's just been a real pleasure working with Irina and her team on this project. Well, you all have built a fantastic data set and conducted a very robust analysis with really interesting results. And I hope other cities learn from this approach, because I think it's a methodological innovation and a paper well worth reading. And the paper also includes a lot of different examples of policies, as we just heard, that other cities are actually already implementing, and that could be achievable for Cleveland, or at least aspirational. So it's very, very exciting work. So first of all, I really like these categories that the team derived: innovation and talent, entrepreneurship, new residential centers, and retirement destinations. And I'd like to start by pointing out that this complicates the story that we're hearing in a lot of economic geography these days. And so, for instance, there's the Enrico Moretti story about the innovation hubs and the idea that there's just going to be a few places in the US that are going to win it all. And if you're not Silicon Valley, if you're not Research Triangle or Route 128, you might as well just curl up and die. And this this analysis shows that that story is just not true, right? There's a number of different ways for regions to grow, even if you're not Silicon Valley. And in some ways, this study confirms what we've been hearing from others in economic geography, particularly Richard Florida, Michael Storper, and Andres Rodriguez-Posay. And the three of them actually just came together and wrote a paper about post-COVID cities and what's going to happen in the recovery. Of super interesting work. And one of the things that they point to in that paper, and then also in their other work, is regional divergence. is this kind of extreme growth of interregional income inequality that's going on in the US. And that's slowing down migration between regions so that nobody can really afford to pick up from Cleveland and move to the coast. So this is this work, I think, it corresponds with that quite nicely. So for Storper and others, you don't have to have a tech future. There are a variety of areas that are growing, yet you have to be really concerned about the Clevelands of the world. So that it gives us a lot to work on. Another thing going on in economic geography right now, I think is interesting to think about for this work, is the work that folks are doing on the social dynamics in the regions that are falling behind. So you have Andres Rodriguez-Posey has written about the revenge of the places that do not matter. I love that title. And so he wrote about Europe in this regard, but many others, political scientists and others, are writing about that revenge in the US context. And what that means is that where places are falling behind, there's a backlash. There's a rise of populism. There's a rise of anti-elitism. And this manifests itself in support for tariffs, trade barriers, and in general, the dismantling of institutions that support global growth and that support inclusive growth. And I don't mean to get into an evaluation of whether populism is good for the economy or not. That's a whole other topic. But I do think that if Cleveland becomes one of this group of revenge places, it will cut Cleveland out of this kind of broader conversation and the broader economic growth that we see in the coastal parts of the U.S. So I think it's important then to kind of keep that social inclusiveness and social dialogue going in Cleveland, so that it grows together with the rest of the country. So the issue now is to figure out, how did these cities that the team points to in the report, how did they do it? So many bounced back, and a lot of that was through their own assets. So they had natural endowments, or they had institutions that they'd invested on over a long period of time, and that created a sort of path dependency where they're succeeding today. And so the question is, how much goes on through assets, and then how much can actually take place through deliberate policy interventions? And if you look at the list of places that we just heard about, you can see that the assets are really, really important here. So Silicon Valley benefits, for instance, from universities who are producing the talent that helps it become a leader in innovation. Florida is benefiting from the weather, so it does well as a retirement center. Minneapolis, it has immigrant clusters that help entrepreneurship there. So most of these cases are benefiting from assets they have already rather than policies. But there are exceptions, and I think we need to look in more detail at the policies that have made a difference. My favorite example is always Austin. Nobody would have thought Austin would be one of the global leaders in innovation 30 years ago, but the state made a tremendous investment in the University of Texas to make that come together, and we have the Austin Miracle today. We're going to talk more about the policies in Cleveland in a moment. But I want to kick off that discussion with just an awful statistic about Cleveland that I just read in a new paper by Richard Florida on the corporate locations. It's in Harvard Business Review this month. And he shows in a table that if you look at corporate headquarters and change in corporate headquarters from 1955 to 2017, Cleveland has lost more than any other city by far. It's gone from 18 corporate headquarters to just 5. It's lost 72%. And the other ones on the list are Detroit and Charlotte and Pittsburgh, which have also lost. But Cleveland leads the way. So this made me think about that kind of vacuum that's left. It seems scary, but maybe it's not that scary. Maybe there's an opportunity here, because you think about all the assets that grew up around those corporations that dominated Cleveland for decades and decades, the arts and the culture and the educational institutions, and the people, and that all remains in Cleveland. So I think there's an opportunity here to kind of remake the city. So those were my thoughts. Hoping to talk more.
I appreciate you sharing those with us. And it's a lot to think about and consider. I'd like to ask both you and Dean Englund here to comment on this idea that there are places that are asset rich, whether it's physical location, like, coastal or weather, and there's a set of those assets that are outside of your control to a large extent. And then others that you mentioned, like the long-term investment in institutions that have gone on. You have experience in leading public policy in places that are asset rich. What are your thoughts on places like Cleveland from that perspective? What assets does Cleveland have to leverage? You sort of mentioned a few. Where should those investments in existing assets be made? And in the context of other places that are very asset rich. Dean Englund, would you like to start?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that I'm very impressed with Dr. Lindell's study of regional prosperity. It's quite something to see some of the things that you think matter actually matter in the empirical sense. I come at the question of assets through the lens of what makes local and regional prosperity go. The first thing is post-secondary attainment, your people. If you have high post-secondary attainment rates, you tend to have higher income, tend to have higher quality of life. And it's not something that's mysterious. It's just that if you have a good sense of a good section of your population that's educated and can take available jobs, you raise the quality of life, you raise the quality of the income. So in that respect, if you compare Cleveland's recent history, say the last 30 years, the rates of post-secondary attainment have not been good or what we would like. I think we need a focus on the total individual. And when I say post-secondary attainment, I don't just mean, every kid goes to college. I mean, every individual either goes to college, has a post-secondary credential, or is involved in lifelong learning. That's the way you really jumpstart and maintain or sustain a local and regional economy. So we have to start real early, from the beginning, kindergarten and onwards, and create this mesh, this seamless mesh or pipeline of people who know where they're supposed to go on the next road to post-secondary attainment. We're trying, I think Cleveland is trying that with Say Yes. We're very hopeful about Say Yes. It's a national model that provides resources at the back end of the pipeline for young people who are coming through CMSD. It's a promise scholarship or a proto-promise scholarship, and it gives last dollar in monies to those individuals. So again, if you ask me what matters and what I've seen matter in other places, it's post-secondary attainment. The other thing that matters that Cleveland doesn't have quite a bit of, but it needs to, is good old-fashioned immigration. Some places that I've worked in on the East Coast, namely the New York metropolitan area, there's a pretty good influx of people coming from all over the place. The Caribbean, the southern cone of Latin America. And these new populations bring with them the oomph, the enthusiasm, the desire for the good life, the American dream. And coupled with the ability of educational institutions in those places to help them get post-secondary degrees or credentials, immigration has been a real helpmate to regional prosperity. In Cleveland, I think we've tried to attract people, and we have had glimmers of growth, but no real substantive growth, and in immigration. And we really do have to make that work. In absence of immigration, we've got to keep the young people here that we send to college and who grow up here. And that's a matter of being intentional, or putting in place intentional policies to get them connected very early to the workplace and the workforce. And I think Dr. Lendo's studies show this, that people want to be around quality places. And sometimes these places grow up spontaneously or organically. But then we have huge tracts, huge places in Cleveland and other legacy cities where it's not so nice. And the only thing that I know of that can help jumpstart the quality of life in these places and encourage inclusion, encourage the reduction of poverty, is the community development movement. And it's very ironic that in a place that has been at the leadership of the community development movement, that it is not worked as well as we hoped in places like Huff and Glenville. And that's not the fault of the CDCs, I think, or community development corporations. We often ask too much of them. But I think what's going on here is that we have missed linking community development strategies apart from and with community institutions. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you want to encourage entrepreneurship, you really need access to low-cost capital. You really need access to institutions, low bank institutions that can help entrepreneurs prosper, small-scale entrepreneurs. And these strategies need to be linked to community-based institutions like CDCs, and they can provide a holistic, wraparound community development environment, if you like. So those 4 or 5 things that I've mentioned, I have seen matter in local and regional prosperity. And there's an opportunity to bolster them here in the Cleveland metropolitan area.
Yeah, I think the dean has it absolutely right. And I would, it's all about the people, right? And so it's about the people with getting the post-secondary degrees. It's about the immigration, and it's about the people that are building community in Cleveland, CDCs and other community intermediaries. And that's where you have to start. And that sort of leads you towards that type, the new residential center, which I think is the one that if I were Cleveland, I would aspire to most. I would not try to be the center of innovation and the Silicon Valley. And, I would point to on the coasts how that dream has really gone awry, right? Because you have, for instance, tech in Boston and in California, which has become huge, where you just have 4 or 5 huge players that are dominating the regions and acting. This is what Ann Markuson wrote years ago about Seattle and Boeing and then Microsoft. They act monopolistically. They take all the resources. They suck all the blood out of the place. And so that young talent is not really able to thrive in that way. They just, the startup environment doesn't really thrive. It can't really, the resources are all being eaten up by the tech giants. And this is true even in the universities. on the coast, which have become very focused on computer science and data science and are defunding their humanities in order to send more people to computer science degrees, because you graduate with a bachelor's degree and you earn $120,000 in Silicon Valley. So that's not going to be the story for Cleveland, and it shouldn't be. And there's other ways to grow prosperous without that.
So it sounds to me like there's this sort of not too big, not too small, sort of comfortable middle place for somewhere like Cleveland. But what I also heard, Dean England, you speaking to, were a lot of policy intervention and investment opportunities, not necessarily asset in the sense of, whether or place-based, but again, going back to people, investing in the people and the institutions that support people. And certainly Cleveland has a very strong community development world and sector. And so what would that look like if a place like Cleveland were to further invest and further drive this idea of achievable and aspirational to be like other places? Where would we need to invest in that community development world? What would we need to see happen?
I think there are discrete places. The first place that I would mention is the intermediary role in building local capacity. In many places that I've worked, there are national community development intermediaries that play a very important role in aggregating capital, local capital. They also play a role in building the capacity of the local organizations. And the local organizations sometimes chafe at that, and I understand why. Who needs an intermediary between us and the funders? But I think we need to look at our current practices and see if we can bolster what, for example, Enterprise Partners accomplishes here. Do we need other intermediaries? Do we need more of a capacity building program? Those are things that we should look at, and I dare say we will find we need to make some investment in that area. We also need to make sure that our public flow of dollars to these institutions is done well and done efficiently. I think that's a policy issue. Who gets CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, who gets to work on city projects. Those are sort of fundamental small-scale things that we can look at to see if the right things are in place. Did I answer your question? Okay.
So Dr. Chappell, in looking at cities that are doing well right now, and there are cities that are doing very well, what are sort of the low-hanging fruit where we can learn from these places that score high, 5 factors or a few of them, where Cleveland can begin to take from their example more readily than sort of long-term investment strategies?
Yeah, so it's hard, thinking about this question, it's hard not to think about the COVID-19 crisis, and because this is going to affect us. It's going to affect our economic development policy, our community development policy, probably for the next 3 or 4 years at least, as we're in recession mode. And so thinking about those opportunities, I think there's several things that Cleveland would want to get a jump start on. The one that pops into my mind first is really around health. And when I think about Cleveland, I think about the Cleveland Clinic. I think about all the different hospitals and the institutions. And Cleveland is really, well written about. The Democracy Collaborative has written a lot about the anchor institutions and the entrepreneurship that comes out of that, and all the opportunities there. Well, this is going to be a growth time for health in coming years and right now, really. And so I would want to see Cleveland refocus its efforts on the health cluster. But also in terms of COVID-19, you hear talk also about reshoring, and there's some thought that there may be some opportunities here to get our supply chains relocalized. And I would be, if I were you all, I would be looking into those areas right now to see what could be done and what could be brought back. I think a lot about retail these days, and very distressing statistics that are coming out about businesses closing, and particularly the study out of Stanford with preliminary numbers, which said 41% of Black-owned enterprises have already closed in this country. That's a horrific statistic. So I would want to be focusing on minority entrepreneurship and really targeting Black-owned businesses with all the resources I have to do technical assistance to help people stay open for the next year or two, and really thinking about and maybe working with the community intermediaries on that to really do localized efforts. And then finally, I would think about civic infrastructure. And so it just both in the short term and the long term, when I think about what might be the niche for Cleveland, I don't think it's going to be the young talent. I think, and I think all the economic geographers are saying that, the folks that want to go to New York and San Francisco and LA, they're still going to do it. Those are going to be the places that suck up the very young talent. But that talent grows old. They need to have families. They're looking for places to raise their families, and they're looking for places that have good school districts, that have libraries, that have parks and recreation, that have all the bones of civic infrastructure and what, well, actually, Eric Kleinenberg calls this social infrastructure, his book, Palaces for the People. So thinking about, as I'm thinking about Cleveland rebuilding after COVID, short-term, long-term, thinking about where you can do, if there is a Green New Deal, that New Deal should be really about recreating that infrastructure that builds communities in the Cleveland neighborhoods, because that was what the place has been known for historically, and it could be a place that families want to come.
I hear a theme of, and Dr. Lendl, you talked about the polarization factor, but there's certainly a theme of inclusion that's contributing to success in these places. And that includes supporting minority businesses, that includes supporting education, that includes supporting the neighborhoods in many of these urban places. So how, investing in a set of public policies aimed at growth and competitiveness that incorporates inclusion, what places are doing well at this right now? And, what are the types of policies that Cleveland can look to implement around and that address inclusion?
I know, Molly, you will ask me the hardest question. So, as I said in the presentation, if you want to look what places score well on that indicator, look for places that don't have diversity. It's a predominantly white places. So what it tells you that the places that have higher percentage of diversity and minority population have the same problem as Cleveland. It's a systematic problem across the board. There is really very hard to find a place that score high in this indicator and really solve the problem of inclusion, and the place has a comparable percentage of minority population in Cleveland. We are not alone in this program, in this problem, and unfortunately, I think it's what Dean England said. It's a back to the roots. It's a back to the basic, with the good community, community foundations, community organizations, community capacity that can resolve this problem. there is no a silver bullet here that you can administer top down some, you know, approach and magically resolve this situation. It's a systematic change that should happen with consistent investment and consistency in building the capacity. And all the interruption in federal policy, you know, all the swings, ups and downs in funding are not helpful. And this is where philanthropic community is stepping up. This is where community foundations are stepping up. And we do have a very rich history in this supports. And I think just keep doing it. And that's a silver bullet for Cleveland, is just invest more and keep building capacity. And again, in philanthropic and in federal supports, there are all these changes that I live in my professional field long enough to experience, that we're building capacity and then we you know, switch to doing only projects, and all of a sudden it's not good, you know, to fund the capacity. It's a ill policy. We really need to recognize that without building capacity, we cannot build projects, program, and really elevate to the results that we aspire. My mantra in resolving this question is building the capacity, and the systematic change can be achieved only with that. But I also want to comment a little bit on Karen's comment, because I'm sure it's going to hurt a lot of people when they will hear that you don't need to build tech sector and entrepreneurship. You don't need to become Silicon Valley in Cleveland. And I mean, we all have our egos, and of course we want to rank against the highest places. And I should tell you also that we eliminated we didn't include San Jose in this sample, right? So we're not even including those that are high in the sky. What I think is an excellent analogy that I learned from our culture sector. When we study arts and culture in Cleveland, they told me, yeah, we know we're not a Broadway, and everybody wants to be on the Broadway. But the secret of success is, if you succeed in Cleveland, you will succeed in Broadway. So I want this formula to be for our tech sector and entrepreneurship sector. And I believe Cleveland is doing a lot over the last about 15 years. We do have excellent intermediaries that build entrepreneurship and innovation, and we have a jumpstart that is nationally recognized in this, and now we have a whole coalition like building in this area. But I think we need to find our niche. Maybe we shouldn't build the tech companies that build like tech, but we can be a place that has you know, a capacity to help non-tech companies to build their tech sectors, that has enough tech jobs and tech opportunities, because we are so highly manufacturing place. Yes, we lost fair share of our manufacturing, but we still, our economy has about 27% of manufacturing companies. And if we want to succeed at the place and help these enterprises, we want to have a fair tech sector that can help our manufacturing and become on a par with this Industry 4.0 changes, with Internet of Things, with all this, you know, the changes that are happening in manufacturing itself. So we have to be technology savvy, and we are actually producing, our universities are actually graduating much more tech specialists than we are capturing in our region. We are exporting tech workforce right now. So we have this untapped talent right in our backyard. And maybe we should look to the policies where we can provide for minority population, impoverished population, some career path that can take them from like post-secondary attainments all the way, whether it's through colleges or not through colleges, through community colleges, through training, through boot camps, but we can offer these opportunities.
So I am going to, in the interest of time, have that be our kind of final comment and answer. And that was a lot to think about. And it sounds like Cleveland already has a lot going for it, and a lot of places where maybe we need to think about shoring up investment, looking more long-term at things. But I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. I would also like to remind folks, as Dr. Lendl did, that if you would like more information about this project, past Roundtable events, please visit the link below in the section here of the posting of the video. We'll be posting the report there as well. I would like to thank all of you for your time today. It was a lot to take in, a lot to think about. So thanks again. Take care, everyone.